On today's show, is James Borrego the top candidate for the Cavs job? We talk about it on Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. The show is free and available on YouTube as well. Be sure to give us a like. On today's show, subscribe to the Locked On Cavs channel, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello again, everybody. I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers with Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, or once upon a time at ESPN Cleveland. On today's show, we're talking about the coaching search that's still ongoing for the Cavs. We got some news today. James Borrego interviewing in person. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Sounds like Kenny Atkinson might as well. I think Borrego is trending towards being the top candidate for the Cavs. And a little bit later on in the show, we'll talk about why I don't think that Lakers job opening matters at all when it comes to the Cavs job search. But it was reported on Tuesday that James Borrego, and this was reported by Mark Stein, that James Borrego, former Charlotte Hornets head coach, current associate head coach with the New Orleans Pelicans, would be in Cleveland to interview formally for the head coaching job with the Cavs. I think that this is something that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. I think if you've been following along, if you've been reading some tea leaves, I do think that this is something that has been part of the plan. And I don't think it's connected to the Lakers not landing Dan Hurley and the Cavs speeding up their process, but we'll get into that later on in the show. But I think that we're starting to see this search maybe trend a little bit towards James Borrego. Now, let's put together a timeline here. So, I believe it was May 23rd. They fired JB Bickerstaff. The Cavs decided it was time to part ways. They needed a new voice. They needed a new set of eyes in that locker room. Immediately after that, it might have been in Adrian Wojnarowski's next tweet, as he was one of the first ones to report the news of Bickerstaff's firing, that James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson would be two candidates on the list for the Cavaliers. And then, of course, we know Cavs president of basketball operations, Kobe Altman, said at his media availability the next day that the team wasn't at a point where they had put together a list of any sort. But those two names, Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego, were the first two names that we heard. And then once the Cavs took Memorial Day weekend, as they said they were going to kind of recharge and get ready for this coaching search that's now been going on for around 2 weeks. Once that happened, the first two names that we heard that the Cavs had received permission to interview were James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson. So, and then we get to the point now, and of course there were other names that the Cavs had received permission to interview. Think Chris Quinn, think Johnny Bryant, Micah Nori, David Adelman. There have been a lot of names that have been connected one way or another to this Cavs job. But it makes sense to me that the first two names that we've heard this entire time have been James Borrego and have been Kenny Atkinson. And then we find out on Tuesday that the Cavs are meeting in person with James Borrego. Again, Mark Stein, the one to report this, longtime NBA insider. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I do think that this is trending to Borrego being the guy that is the top candidate for the Cavs. I think if he were not, we wouldn't hear as much about him. He wouldn't be consistently the first one to go through this process. And I do think that today is really the first time that we've publicly at least heard him mentioned ahead of Kenny Atkinson as far as doing something first, right? You think that first report, it was both of them. And then it was at the same time it was reported the Cavs had received permission to interview both of them. It wasn't a one in front of the other situation. This is the first time where one of those two guys has done something first. How much does that matter? I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if it matters that James Borrego is interviewing in person before Kenny Atkinson, which I do believe it was reported by Brian Windhorst that Atkinson and the Cavs do plan to meet in person at some point this week. How much does it matter Borrego is first? I don't know. I don't. But I do think that he is the guy, just from reading some tea leaves, I do think he is the guy that is at the top of their list. And I think there are a number of reasons as to why he makes sense here in Cleveland. Because you look at his track record, the Cavs at this point are in a position, not necessarily to where they need to overcorrect for the way things were done in the past, but whenever you have a defensive-minded head coach, which I think it's a very fair way to characterize JB Bickerstaff, whenever you have a defensive-minded head coach and you're ready to make a move, make a change at that spot, 9 out of 10 times you're going to go from a defensive-minded guy who, let's give him credit, the defense for the most part has been really good since the Cavs have been good, but the offense hasn't been where it's needed to be. So you're going to go, again, 9 out of 10 times, pretty frequently, go from a defensive-minded guy to an offensive-minded guy. James Borrego fits that. If you take a look, and I do think it's a fun exercise if you want to do this, go and take a look at what some of those Charlotte teams did offensively under him, because I don't think that those rosters in Charlotte were all that talented. I don't think that, I know Kemba Walker was there for a little bit. I know he had LaMelo Ball, LaMelo's rookie year, which was Borrego's best year in Charlotte. But those teams were really good offensively. And yeah, Kemba was a great talent. But specifically that last year he was there, where he was essentially let go because the Hornets didn't play any defense. How much of that is on him? I don't know. But getting a really good offense out of a unit that is led by a young guard is a really, really, really difficult thing to do. I want you to think back to Darius Garland's first year, his first year in Cleveland. It was clear that he had talent. Like, I thought, okay, one day this kid's going to be a good NBA player. I don't know what his ceiling's going to be. I don't know what his floor is going to be, but I know he's going to vastly improve from what he is year one, because it's a tough transition from going to, in Garland's case, 5 college games at Vanderbilt before going to the NBA. And in LaMelo Ball's case, a whole smorgasbord of experience at levels that I think are below playing at Vanderbilt. And turning that into a top 10 unit offensively is a big challenge. And the fact that Borrego was able to do that, I do think bodes really well for him as an offensive coach. Now, that doesn't mean he's a coach that's without question. He's not some flawless coach. There were issues. If he weren't a flawless coach, he would still be a head coach in Charlotte right now, and the Hornets probably would have had more success than they would. I also do think with him, it's worth taking a look at what has happened in Charlotte since he left, because that situation's been pretty bad. The Hornets have not been a good basketball team since he left. How much of that is on coaching? How much of that is on injury? I don't know. I can't tell that whole story. I'm not there, but I think it's something that's worth noting. So when you lean into an offensive-minded coach, as if the Cavs hire Borrego, they would be doing here, that gives me hope, even if, and later in the week, we are going to talk a little bit about if the Cavs do keep together this backcourt. If they do keep together this backcourt, Borrego is actually a guy that I've got faith in because of his offensive track record, that he can figure out that situation probably a little bit better than most other coaches that they're looking at. Probably a little bit better than some of the other coaches that are on their list. And I think that is something that is absolutely, worth considering as you go through this, is what's the offense going to look like if the Cavs hire Borrego? What's player development going to look like if the Cavs hire Borrego? And that player development is something that we're going to talk about coming up in just a bit. But again, doing it with a rookie guard, that to me screams player development, because no one comes into this league as a finished product. Absolutely no one. But I do think right now, the fact that James Borrego interviewed for the job on Tuesday, according to Mark Stein, the first one to formally meet in person with the Cavs, is probably a pretty good sign that he is the guy. If he's not number one on their list, I have to think he's 1B. I don't know how he could be any lower than that on their list, because everything has told me that we've seen, all the information that's been reported by the big newsbreakers in the NBA, that James Borrego is someone they're really, really high on. I expect that we're going to hear more about this in the coming days, so we will absolutely continue to talk about this situation. But I think he is the guy that is, if he's not at the very top of the list, he's very much near the top of the list. And that's something to keep in mind. Let's talk Kenny Atkinson, because he's someone also rumored to be interviewing with the Cavs this week in person. So we're going to do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you are thinking of going to therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, which is one of the biggest things that makes it so convenient, is that it's entirely online. Right now, your life is probably pretty hectic. You probably have a lot going on. That doesn't mean you can't have time to talk to somebody. That doesn't mean you can't have time to give therapy a try, and BetterHelp could be just the place for you to do it. It is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suitable to your schedule. You're probably pretty busy, like I said. Having therapy that is suited to your schedule is a pretty big deal, and something that can absolutely make it easier to get the help that you need. Just go online, fill out a brief questionnaire, and you will get matched with a licensed therapist. Plus, if that therapist you're matched with, you find out maybe not the best fit for you, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA for 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So, James Borrego interviewed with the Cleveland Cavaliers on Tuesday, according to Mark Stein. It sounds like, according to Brian Windhorst, that Kenny Atkinson going to be interviewing formally for this Cavs job as well, which I do think, again, going back to just about everything I said about Borrego, I think a lot of that is applicable to Atkinson. And there are reasons why, and I've come around on Borrego the more digging I've done into his past history as a coach, and really just some of those teams in Charlotte. I've come around to him more as a candidate, where I wasn't quite as high, I think, as a lot of people were on him at the start of this process. I was more high on Kenny Atkinson, and maybe some of that's because I watched so much more of that Brooklyn team, right? If you're listening to this, there's a good chance you've been a Cavs fan for more than just the last handful of years, and you remember watching that 2018 Nets team that Kenny Atkinson was the head coach of, and the Cavs had that Nets pick through the Kyrie Irving trade. And Kenny Atkinson really got a lot out of that team, to where they won so many games that the Cavs ended up with Colin Sexton instead of, I don't know, that Luka Doncic guy that went in that draft number 3 overall. So I know that we as Cavs fans are probably just a little bit more familiar with Atkinson. And I certainly was someone that was more familiar with Atkinson, but there are a lot of things to like about Borrego. I do still think there are a lot of things to like about Kenny Atkinson as well, though. I really do. I think that he is going to be a really good head coach somewhere. If it's in Cleveland, I think he'd be a great fit. If it's somewhere else, I think he will be a great fit at a certain point as well. You know, you think back to his history, aside from coaching in Brooklyn, he's been an assistant with the Clippers. He's been an assistant with Golden State under Steve Kerr for the last handful of years. Actually was offered the Charlotte Hornets job, I believe, after James Borrego got fired, and turned them down. Decided, you know what, this is not a good situation, don't want to be there. And I respect that a lot, because there are only 30 of these jobs in the world. So to be offered one and say, I'm not going to take this job just for the sake of taking it, I think that's a really good thing. And actually something that I like when you talk about him as a head coaching candidate, is that he doesn't just want to take a job to take a job. If he's going to take a job such as this one, it's going to be because it's the right fit for him and it's a good situation. And I think that's something that it just matters a little bit. Aside from that, with Atkinson, I like what he does offensively. I think he's gotten the most out of his teams. It can be at times a little difficult, I think, to look past some of the stuff at the end in Brooklyn, with the way that, you know, it ended with Kyrie Irving, with Kevin Durant, the fact that he couldn't or didn't, and I don't know how much of this is even fair, but the superstar experience didn't go well for him, right? When Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving arrived, things went south pretty quick for Kenny, and I don't think it's all his fault. I'm sure he's not blameless in that, but I certainly don't think it's all his fault by any stretch of the imagination. But if you look at what he was able to do with some of those earlier teams, he has been someone that's been able to develop players. What he was able to get out of D'Angelo Russell, who I don't think is all that good. What he was able to get out of Karis LeVert, despite Karis dealing with some pretty significant injuries. You think back to Karis when he was on that Brooklyn team before Durant and Kyrie got there, dislocated his ankle, went through some pretty serious physical stuff, and was still able to be a good basketball player, helped to develop Jarrett Allen, obviously, who we know very, very well here in Cleveland. So the player development stuff for him, I think, speaks pretty well. And I wonder if he could be someone that is, because of his background offensively as a coach, because of the situation he's been in the last several years, I wonder if he is more, I believe that Kenny Atkinson is more ready right now for a head coaching job than he's ever been. And this might be the best situation for him that he could be in. That I just think is something that is worth bringing up. So to see if, and hey, maybe the interview with James Borrego goes so well for the Cavs that they don't need to do other interviews, that they decide, hey, this is our guy, we want to go after him. And if that's the case, go after him. Like, that is what should be done here. Because if you find the guy that you want to be the head coach and you've got him in your building, you don't want to let him leave all the time. You don't want to especially considering there is another opening. There's one more opening. Maybe you don't want to let him leave, but I don't think either of these guys are bad options. I truly don't. I think that you should be happy as a Cavs fan if either one of these guys are hired, because I think both of them, maybe in a little bit different ways, but I think both of them pretty well fit the mold for what you want in the next head coach of the Cavs. And I think that is, at the end of the day, these names don't matter so much as, does this coach fit a particular mold that the Cavs are looking for? And I think the answer with both of these guys, with both James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson, I think that answer is yes. I really do. What I will be interested to see, because it's clear with everything that's come out, the order things have come out, I think it's clear these have been and are the top two guys. I will be very interested if more than just James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson end up with in-person interviews with the Cavs. That is something that I will be very, very interested to see, because it could be a situation, especially when you consider some of the other names on this list. It could be a situation where you are interviewing that person to be the head coach, but it also could be a situation to where, hey, we think we're going to hire somebody else, but we would love for you to be our lead assistant. That's something that it could be that situation. And there's not necessarily harm in doing that. When you get the chance to interview somebody, to have somebody in your building, to see how they mesh, that could be how staffs start to build. And that just could be something to keep an eye on. But, I do think that the top two guys in this search are Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego. Right now, I think Borrego is probably a little bit higher in terms of the preference for the Cavs than Atkinson is. I think part of that is because he's the first one to get an interview, but I don't think it would be wise to write off Kenny Atkinson. I don't. There's one more opening in the NBA. There's one more head coaching job left. We all know who it is. It's the Los Angeles Lakers, right? How could you forget about that? It feels like that job has been open forever. It doesn't matter when it comes to the Cavs opening, though. And I'll tell you why right here on Locked On Cavs. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and so much more. And you know what? You can bet on that with FanDuel. FanDuel is the place to go, because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when you hit on any $5 bet that wins. You hit on a $5 bet, $200 in bonus bets in your account if you are a new customer to FanDuel. There's a lot to bet on right now. NBA Finals, the long shot pick I like. I know Game 3 tonight, Mavs, Celtics, Drew Holiday, Finals MVP, plus 600 on FanDuel. Those are some pretty good odds for a guy that's had a great start to this series. If it were a best of 3, and it was the first of 2 wins. Drew Holiday might be the MVP. I don't know. I know it's not Jason Tatum, but it might be Drew Holiday. You can get him at plus 600. I think that's a pretty good long shot bet to place if you're looking to spice up your NBA Finals experience. But like I said, $200 in free bets. If you go to FanDuel, go to FanDuel.com/LockedOnNBA. You get $200 that you can use from everything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit a home run in baseball that night. $200 in bonus bets with a winning $5 bet when you visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNBA, and you can start adding big wins to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So the Los Angeles Lakers have been looking for a head coach for longer than the Cleveland Cavaliers have been looking for a head coach. We know they fired Darvin Ham after they lost in 5 games to the Denver Nuggets in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs. They have had what I think has been a pretty tumultuous search for them, because they go from, it was reported by The Athletic that JJ Redick's the guy, that they're going to hire JJ Redick. He's going to be the next coach of the Lakers. He and LeBron going to have the podcast together and be, in the same organization. How awesome would that be? So much drama. Well, then they pivot to Dan Hurley, the head coach of the Connecticut men's basketball team, back-to-back national champions. I don't watch a ton of college basketball, but I think that Dan Hurley obviously does a great job. Well, Hurley decides to turn them down. So now they're in a position where you wonder, okay, well, does the fact that the Lakers still don't have their guy, and they're the Lakers, right? They're in Los Angeles, a glamour market, one of the historic franchises in the NBA. They have a lot of things that not a lot of franchises can say. I don't think that means the Cavs need to speed things up. I don't. I've thought about this, and maybe it could be something that does force them to speed it up, but I don't think they need to. And I don't think they need to because this Cavs job is such a better job than the Lakers job. I don't think it's close. So let's list out why. The Lakers, yeah, it's LA. It's the Lakers, the glitz, the glam, LeBron, Anthony Davis, all that stuff. You know what it's not? It's not a solid place to coach right now. There's not a lot of stability in that organization right now. When you take a look at it, Frank Vogel won a title back in 2020. How much longer did he last? Darvin Ham, 2 years. Western Conference Finals, playoffs lost against the defending champ. And I get it's not all the results. There's so much more that goes into this than just the results at the end of the day. But there's not a lot of stability for a coach there. There's not. And then you take a look at, that's a Western Conference team. While right now the Eastern Conference has the best team in basketball in Boston, they're most likely going to win 2 of their next however many games that they're going to play and hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy. Other than that, how many teams are there that you can definitively say in the Eastern Conference that team's going to be better than the Cavs next year? And there's a lot of questions that need to be answered about the Cavs and a lot of other teams in this conference. Don't get me wrong. But you can say right now, yeah, Boston's probably going to be better than everyone else in the East again next year. Who's going to be number 2? You can't point that out for sure. You can't. Now let's go over to the West. What's the pathway for the Lakers to be? I'm not even going to say the number 2 team in the conference, but even a top 4 team in the conference. Yeah, they've got a lot of talent, but let's take a look at this. So Dallas is in the finals. They're going to be running it back next year. I don't see a ton of avenues for their team to look drastically different. And since this team has been assembled after the trade deadline, they've been one of the best in basketball. Do you think Oklahoma City's going anywhere? I don't. I mean, maybe they take a little bit of a step back, but they're still going to be really good. Minnesota, they've got some questions, but overall, they're really talented. I'm not sure they're going to break things up. Denver, yeah, they, didn't work out for them in the playoffs this year. They're still going to be really good. And they still have the Lakers number. You can just go on and on and on and just down this list. The Clippers, if they're healthy, they're in a better situation right now. I don't see the roadmap for the Lakers to be competitive for a conference title. I see that road. Yeah, the Cavs might have a bigger obstacle at the end, when the conference finals arrive in Boston than anyone the Lakers could see in the Western Conference Finals. But the roadmap to getting there, I think, is so much more clear in the Eastern Conference. I think that matters. And then you take a look at the stability factor. Yeah, there have been a couple of guys that the Cavs have hired in the last decade. Yeah, last decade starting this summer that didn't work out. David Blatt was not a good idea, was not a good fit. And to be fair to him, he was hired to coach a team that was drastically different than the team he ended up coaching. But then Ty Lue was around for quite a while. Ty Lue leaves. John Beilein. That was a bad idea. Didn't work out. Very bad hire. But then JB Bickerstaff takes over. JB, when he was relieved of his duties 2 weeks ago, he was, I believe, the 5th or 6th longest tenured head coach in basketball. There's a lot of change in the NBA head coaching spots, but the Cavs have actually been a relatively stable organization as far as head coaches go in the last decade. Yes, they've had 4. 2 of them were a disaster, but the 2 that were even remotely good, and I'm talking 4 full-time head coaches, I'm not talking the voice of the team, Larry Drew, but the 2 that were remotely good stuck around for a while. This is a situation where, because I do believe that to be true, I think that this Cavs organization is willing to put forth just about everything that they need to put a coach and a roster in a position to be successful. When you add all that stuff up, I think that this Cavs opening is such a better job opening right now than the Lakers is. And I haven't even mentioned LeBron yet, because you might think, well, yeah, you have to mention LeBron. He is the greatest player ever. Or maybe you don't think that. I do. Maybe you don't. And that's true. But it's really, really difficult to be the head coach of a team that has a superstar on it that is not what he once was. And LeBron is still great. LeBron is still one of the best players in basketball. But he's also going to be 40 in December. He's also somebody that is clearly not what he once was. He's still great, but he's not the guy that he once was. That can be a difficult, delicate situation to manage. I don't know that it will be with LeBron, but if I'm a coach that's looking for a job right now that's in consideration for both of these jobs, I'm going with the younger team. I'm going with the team that has I think, a clearer path to competitiveness. And that's the Cavs. And it's not close. It's not. On tomorrow's show, Bleacher Report's Greg Swartz planning on joining us. Going to do a little exercise. Who says no? Right? We're going to put together a bunch of trades, talk through them, try and come up with who says no to those trades. So that'll be on tomorrow's Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find me on Twitter at RealDCunningham. Be sure, find the show on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe. Give us a 5-star review. Watch the video on YouTube. You can see my face. It's great. You can watch my facial expressions and how I talk with my hands sometimes as we go through this episode. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe. Hit that notification bell too so you know when a new episode of Locked On Cavs is going up on YouTube. Do those things. Help us to grow the show. Very, very much appreciated. Also, it's a little ways out, but sometime next week, I want to do another mailbag. I really liked how last week's mailbag went, so we're going to do another one at some point next week. So start dropping questions in the comments. I know I haven't responded to a ton of comments lately. I still do read them. I haven't had as much time as I would like to really go through and interact with you guys, but I promise I will be doing more of that as soon as I can. But I want to do another mailbag coming up on next week right here on Locked On Cavs. So stick with us. Find us every day. Make us your first listen. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And I will talk to you tomorrow.